All right, man. Hey, everybody. I just want to introduce my buddy Mark Arena to all of you. Mark here is a friend of mine I've met through the gym at Empire Athletics, and I've been wanting to get a scenario where I can have a chance to sit down with Mark and just kind of share what kind of person he is and the guy that I've come to like and become friends with at the gym. And what's really kind of sparked my interest with Mark is that we seem to have a lot of similarities in the things that interest us. We both love the weight room, but we're both kind of a little bit of nerds, whether we like it or not, when it comes to the actual, the science of between nutrition, how the body works, and just kind of really enjoy those things. And where you have a background in nursing as well as, fitness itself, you've kind of really amazed me. A lot of the whiteboards you've put together, and that's one thing I'll put in the description below for everybody is your connection onto your Instagram.
Oh, great.
Um, so that way they can kind of check out some of your whiteboards that you put, take these pictures of these whiteboards on some of these lessons that you've taught people on all different topics, and kind of give everyone a little bit of insight into what you do during your day to kind of share these things. So yeah, Mark, if you want to just kind of maybe introduce yourself, give yourself a little background into kind of how you
Sure.
started in the fitness world at first, and that'd
Yeah.
be great.
My name is Mac Arena, originally from Boston, Massachusetts, and I've been out here in God's country in the jewel of North Central Massachusetts for a long time. Um, I'm essentially a Bostonian expatriate, I suppose. But the fitness world is is something that I hold really near and dear to me. And I got into health, fitness, and bodybuilding um, pretty much as a way to change myself, to reimage myself.
Mhm.
Um, it was something I had always been interested in, and unfortunately, as a teenager, I was overweight,
Mm.
and um, my evil stepfather and my mother um, used to make a lot of really derogatory comments, and so I think that's where that started. I think that's where my body dysmorphia started, and probably an eating disorder, I imagine. But in any case,
Wow.
it you know it pushed me in the right direction. So on my own, in virtually in secret, um, I was making my own weights. I was working on my own workout programs, not knowing what I was doing. And then probably like a lot of people in the 80s, we started to get pushed towards, Joe Weider and the like. And I read an article recently, I think it was called like Joe Weider Ruined My Life or something like that. And you know, but for whatever it is, I think following the lives and even programs of professional bodybuilders, Mr. Olympia type bodybuilders, um, sort of moved me in that direction. And and you know, luckily I was young enough and I adapted to this. My initial entry into the military helped me do that as well. Helps me lose a lot of weight. Um,
Now, don't mean to interrupt, but just to backtrack,
yeah.
how old were you when you first started kind of having a little bit of thoughts of or insecurities with your own kind of image, or 'cause I consider that
Probably
kind of the same thing. My
probably school age, to be honest with you. I think that's when it first impacted. And and it's interesting because it wasn't that I was an inactive kid, you
right.
know. I played, I was always outside, and I was involved in team sports and organized team sports. and that really just didn't seem to make much of a difference.
Yeah.
But I think it was weightlifting that really made the most difference.
Yeah.
So
Is that why you went into kind of the world of trying to lift weights initially? Was just, shed a little bit of.
I'm just glancing over here because Wendy just came home and she's trying to be quiet and she doesn't know how to be. So
That's it. Neither am I. Neither am I.
yeah,
Hi, Wendy.
yeah, yeah. She's trying to tiptoe through the kitchen, but she's going to make coffee and then realize there's no water in the Keurig. So then she's going to throw water in it. And
No
so
worries
anyway,
at all. No
yeah.
worries at all.
So no, it's all good. And this was my way of giving her permission to, go ahead and do what she's got to do. No, you don't need permission. But so anyway, so there's that.
So you're saying
So
it was about school age you started
yeah, and that really sparked my interest. And I didn't get any, there was no parental support. I had a stepbrother, but he wasn't involved, so there was really none of that. So like I think like a lot of kids in that era with absentee fathers in particular, looked for other role models, other men to emulate. And unfortunately for me as well, my closest uncle and my grandfather had passed away, so there was it. I had like nothing left. So I turned to Arnold and Sylvester Stallone and Jean-Claude Van Damme, and as ridiculous as that may sound, I certainly know that I'm not the only one, right? So, and I think we all were like, okay, well, I want to be a badass like him, and I want to look like that somehow,
Sure. Yeah.
And I realized when I enlisted in the Army, I was 17, and I realized I think the very first day that I was not going to be Rambo. Uh, and that shattered that idea very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, but very specifically into bodybuilding, I pretty quickly started to, look pretty good. I got a part-time job working at GNC. And at the time, they had a program that was called GNC Fit Systems. I don't know if you remember that, but
No,
it
not
didn't
that.
it didn't last very long. It was pretty much it was a marketing ploy where they would have the in shape store sales rep who would bring you aside and do like a very rudimentary electrical impedance of body fat measurement and say, oh, well, you're 18% body fat, Jimmy. And then you'd plug that information into a computer program. And of course, it would spit out like a basic 3-day a week weight training workout and what supplements would be the best for Jimmy to take for him to lower that body fat and gain muscle. And of course it worked, right? Because people want people are always going to follow the path of least resistance.
Yeah.
And so that's really where I entered really the official bodybuilding world and the supplement world. And I quickly realized that the information was not as valid as we were thought to believe or led to believe. And when I moved out to Central Mass, I started working at a GNC locally, and they didn't have a fit systems. So I was expected to just make sales, and I wasn't particularly very good at that. But I used to buy all my supplements and get the discount, and then all my buddies that I worked out with when there was still a Gold's Gym in Leominster, before it became Northeast Health and Fitness, and then I think Global. If we could say those names, I don't know, but
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. In any case, all my gym bros would come there. My cousin used to drive out from like Boston all the way to Leominster to get my discount, and they'd come out on the Gold Card Tuesday, and I'd be making this huge bag of commission cash, and between that and like the little memes that would come in the store and ask for something that somebody else told them to buy, and I'd say, oh, if you're on medicine, maybe you should talk to your pharmacist. Don't buy this, just go to CVS across the hallway. And the lady who came in and said her kids played football for Murdoch High School and they needed to gain weight, which was the best weight gainer. And I was like, oh, don't even buy this. Just before every meal, give those boys some peanut butter sandwiches and a glass of milk, and they'll be great. Well, come to find out, Dave, that there were secret shoppers, and everybody and they were shamming me. And one day I came into work, and the regional managers confronted me with it and said, "Are you giving people this advice? And are you using this discount?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I'm doing all of that." And he's like, "Well, this is your last day, so at the end of the day, that's it." And I said, "No, that's not it. It's it right now, because I'm not staying until the end of the day." And I took all the products that I had bought with my discount earlier in that day, and I left.
Yeah. So yeah, no, that same story with myself. My buddy Max had his worked at GNC. We'd give him some money. He'd buy what we needed and get ourselves a deal, because that's all we didn't really buy things on the internet, and it wasn't too long ago till now. There's no GNCs really much anyway. There's a few here and there that, but not like it used to be with the vitamin shops, and so times have changed. So you go from growing up, being a little bit insecure about, maybe how you looked or whatnot, and then you start hitting the gym, and then you're kind of looking for maybe opportunity to be either not in a leadership role, but a little bit more structure. Is that what got you to the service? Looking for more structure?
Yeah, I mean, I think, joining the military, particularly so young, and having recently, retired from the military within the last year and a half or so, it's really not uncommon for younger people, probably females as well, but particularly males, who are looking for some kind of structure and guidance and whatnot to, think, I don't have it. The military can probably give it to me.
Right.
So let me join the Army or the Marine Corps or whatnot.
Yeah.
Some of those kids do great, and they get squared away, and some of those kids don't do well at all.
Yeah.
And they realize that the expectations of me are much higher than I thought they would be.
Sure.
And when I was enlisted, and I tell people this all the time, because I was a career officer when I retired, but when I was enlisted, I was a terrible soldier. I mean, I could do my job. I was an infantryman, but there's not much for an infantry soldier to do during the Cold War. And particularly when, you're junior enlisted, there's really nothing for you to do. So you do everything that everybody else tells you to do, and it's miserable. But I smartened up really fast. And after that first hitch, I went to college and straightened my act out, and here we are today. So
did you pursue healthcare right into college?
Yeah, not initially. I didn't really know what to do, and I think I started in business was my original college major. I think, as probably a lot of people, and then I realized that I had a big interest in mental health, and so I started like my first undergraduate degree is in human services. And I began working in a state hospital here in Massachusetts, and while I was working at the state hospital, I had a couple of buddies of mine that were like working on ambulances part time, and I had another buddy of mine that said, don't stay in this career field. Go to nursing school. You'll make a lot more money. And so I started working. I went through like an EMT program, and I realized I really liked that. And I started working on an ambulance. I started moonlighting in an emergency room, and that was fun. It was really really high energy, fast paced work, and I really liked it.
Good.
And I took my buddy Tom's advice, and I went to nursing school. And I didn't particularly want to be a nurse. I didn't have the Florence Nightingale calling that a lot of people seem to have. And I'll be honest, I didn't even particularly want to help anybody. Not at first. I liked the idea that I was going to make some money.
Yeah.
So, working on an ambulance, you make $7 an hour back then. So, which in this region, that was actually kind of amazing, because that was in the days that this region didn't really have advanced life support in pre-hospital medicine.
Sure.
So there were no paramedics, so we were doing all of the medical and trauma work, and a lot of it was scoop and screw. We would do what we could in the back of an ambulance, because you couldn't stay on the scene long at all, because you really didn't have any tools. I had taken training to train at the intermediate level, but we still didn't even have that. And it wasn't until some years later that we had advanced life support. I became a nurse just before that happened, and began working as a nurse. But then I was only making $12 an hour. So it went from like $7 an hour to $12 an hour. I thought I had a huge bag of cash.
Sure.
But to be honest, I fell in love with the profession, and it wasn't just about the money, and it probably really wasn't about the money all along. It was probably just trying to help other people,
Right.
where I probably felt that nobody had ever helped me with anything, so I was gonna do that.
Right.
Yeah.
So you came to kind of enjoy helping people when they were down, and that's kind of what got you more, because you said,
Oh yeah.
initially you weren't really too interested in that part.
Yeah, absolutely. My initial nursing career, doing medical surgical nursing and bits of emergency nursing, and I really found a niche in an interest in medical and neuropsychiatry, which is really a very complex clinical specialty. It's you're treating people with complex major medical mental illnesses like schizophrenia or bipolar illness, major depression, and they also have like superimposed or a comorbid neurological condition, whether it's Parkinson's disease, or they've had a stroke, or it's neuropsychiatric, or like dementia or Alzheimer's disease. And that, when you have a patient like that, it's really complex. But I really got into it, and that was really my focus in graduate school. And then that's really where I think my interests in how the body and how the mind and how medicine and how science all come together to really affect human beings and how we live. It's when we look, you know, it's funny because, you know, there's all these medical specialties or nursing specialties or even fitness specialties. But at the end of the day, every single system that is in our body, you know, interacts with every other system that's in our body.
Yeah.
And every time one system is affected, another system is affected in some way, directly or indirectly. And whether that's in the short term or it's in the long term, it'll happen.
Sure.
Um,
As well,
and
well as the
go ahead.
as well as the mental game of things. You know, it's, you know, you got your physiological things that kind of build up, and you know, even if, imagine your body's just blind and deaf and it doesn't really know what's going on, just knows how to feel, but then you enter this mental aspect of things, and then yeah, it becomes more of one complex problem, but they can all be dwindled down to simple, you know, somewhat simple systems that all add up together.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you took, you know, say for a mental illness, if you took, say, two different mental illnesses, say something like, you know, a major depressive disorder that, you know, we hear people say all the time, like, oh, I'm really depressed. Um, that's one thing. But to for somebody to live with major depression or a major depressive disorder is life altering and profound. And you know, much like somebody who has another chronic and debilitating illness, they very much are at risk of dying from that illness for some reason, right? So it, as far as the physical and the emotional, we have to imagine in that there's this paradigm that exists that if somebody has this horrible debilitating mental illness, that everything physically about them is going to be impacted, whether that's pain, whether that's fatigue, whether that's sleep, how they eat, what they eat, how much they eat, and eventually, because all the things that happen in our bodies behind the scene that we don't even know about, right? Things like hormone release and catecholamine release, and you know, all these other, even these neurochemicals that get released. Um, they're either trying to, you know, fight for space in a cell, and this battle is going on, and you know, what the person doesn't has no idea until somebody finally draws their blood and they've got this skyrocketing cortisol level, and you know, their thyroid hormone is messed up, and suddenly, you know, the doctor says, oh, I'm sorry, Jimmy, you have, you know, pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes. And um, Jimmy goes home and is now more depressed.
Yeah,
Um, you know, might he, whether Jimmy, you know, seeks solace in a jelly donut or stops eating altogether, right?
sure.
Because he's so depressed and can't get out of bed. Um,
So you have those
so
mental issues kind of bleed into the physical ones, and then you
absolutely,
snowball each
absolutely.
other. Yeah, all
Yep,
together. But
right. You
no, it
know,
makes total sense. Sometimes just stopping. You know, one thing I say to a lot of my coaching clients all the time is, if we have an issue, you know, sometimes it's a very simple issue that might have a simple problem, but sometimes we'll just back up and I say, let's zoom out of the scenario, look at the big picture of things. You know, it could be something like they hit a wall with fat loss, so we'll bring into the scenario, how is stress? You know,
mhm,
are you weighing yourself daily and worrying about a daily number and trying to adjust on the fly, and you get more stressed, and then that leads to your body wanting to conserve energy, or you just, you know, your brain kind of plays tricks on you. So sometimes it'll just be, well, let's take one day off, have a little extra food, get the body feeling better. And sometimes common sense goes, well, you know, energy in versus energy out, that doesn't make sense. Why would you give them more food if they hit a wall? Well, I'm just
right,
trying to drop their stress and try to relieve them a little
right.
bit, so that way they can hit hard the next day and feel like they caught a second wind. So yeah, that's, it's funny how a lot of these things can be these complex problems. Sometimes you can just, I try to tell them, let's zoom out, let's look at a bigger picture of things, make sure we've covered all bases. And something as simple as stress just got you, and then your hunger hormone goes up. You know, you feel the ghrelin, you
Yep.
know, starting to play into your mental game, and all those things really start to affect the physical game. which is what I'm trying to coach people is,
right.
that's that result.
And that's enormous, which was going to really actually bring me to, the, when I was I studied schizophrenics mostly when I was in graduate school. And my research was this, well, it was this very detailed, my research study had to do specifically with alterations in glycemic control and body weight in schizophrenics treated with atypical antipsychotic medication. So, right, yeah, exactly, right. Why is that important? Well, I'll tell you, in when I wrote it, it was wicked important.
Right.
And then my original intent was to study that more in depth, perhaps with a PhD course of study, but that didn't happen. And literally, my wife can vouch for this. Literally within a year, because at the time there was literally no nursing research on it, as far as we knew, other than some poorly documented, sporadic, not very in-depth studies that had been done by nurse scientists. This was the first thing that was done. And yeah, I missed the boat. I missed the boat hugely. Because like literally within that very next year, both you know, science, biological sciences, general medical sciences, and psychiatry, and endocrinology sort of got together, and this creation of, we used to call it metabolic syndrome. Remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And metabolic syndrome was born, and we looked at people's altered glycemic control and altered lipids and blood pressure, body weight, and we realized that there were all these other aspects going on in the body that affected all these other systems. And it's funny, out of that body of research, the information that we know now, specifically with glycemic control problems and insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, that there's this catastrophic inflammatory process that goes on in the body. And this inflammatory process is what literally cooks us from the inside out. And which, particularly in the world of bodybuilding, where I think it's funny because, and I'll probably start sliding off topic, so rope me in.
Go ahead. Yeah.
But I think what happens is, the general public has this, opinion of, gym rats and meatheads, and, makes assumptions that, if you have any appreciable muscle on you, which is not very common these days, right? We see it at our gym because it's a bodybuilding gym and a powerlifting gym. So, that's pretty much everybody in the area that, is jacked and classy, right? Everybody else is just like walking around like regular human beings. And so that's right. That's the cohort that we see.
True.
So and then there's everybody else. And I believe everybody else has this other assumption that, we don't know what's going on. But these are the people who, whether from a scholarly perspective or from a life experience intuitive perspective, they know how the body works, and they know, what happens, chemically, and what biological changes happen, much like you just said. You can alter the course of somebody's day and figure out whether you're, in a calorie deficit or not, or you have an excessive amount of calories, and how that impacted and how that's going to impact the body, not just for that one day, but, there's mathematics involved, right? You could spit that out for 7 days, and figure out, somebody's caloric needs based on, what have you. But
So that you got an interesting into the mental health aspects of things, which I actually was quite interested in asking you. You know, how did you get an interest into mental health as part of the health that you wanted to learn about? I mean, was it just for the fact that most of us Bostonians got a screw loose that you figure something out, or what?
You know, it's a good question. I don't really know the answer to that, to be honest with you. I think it was primarily by mistake. I think it was that I I got an interest academically. I think that's how it happened.
Yeah.
And I just thought, I was like, wow, this is really interesting stuff. And then again, while I was pursuing my human services degree, I started working in a state hospital system. And and so of course I had, firsthand perspective of the lives of chronically mentally ill people. And and it was around that same time that here in Massachusetts, we were in a deinstitutionalization phase. We were closing state hospitals because I think the and I'm going to call them fake social justice warriors. The fake social justice warriors were out there demanding that the state hospital systems close because they thought they were cruel and unusual to house chronically mentally ill people, and to include children and adolescents was some sort of cruel treatment. Well, I can tell you that that the people living in the state hospital system at the time, in particular, both children and adults, were profoundly and intractably mentally ill, and there was no other system in place to include the person's family to adequately provide any care at all.
Wow.
And what we saw here in the Commonwealth is the fallout from that. Now, the one and only time I have ever attended a protest at the State House was to protest against the closing of the state hospital system. And what we saw here in Massachusetts, and consequently nationally, and virtually every other modernized country has the very same problem. What do we do with people who are mentally ill and who are homeless? So, here in Massachusetts, there was a plan in place that there was going to be X number of dollars that would provide almost like an HMO, so like a capitated number of funds was going to be provided, and every private hospital system was going to have X number of beds placed aside for persons who, are like, say, on mass health, or they're homeless. And there was going to be this creation of more community-based mental health treatment programs. Mm-hmm. Well, that's wicked pissa for a year. And then the money runs out. And then, politics change hands. And, the next big thing came down the pipe. I think here in the Commonwealth, the next big thing was, I think, AIDS. We were spearheading into the AIDS crisis, and nobody knew what to do about it. So the mentally ill got the boot again, and there was a refocus. So subsequently, all those persons who were supposed to be able to attend community-based state-funded mental health centers and get hospital beds in privatized hospitals ended up on the streets. So we hear about it now, 40 years later, the whole mass and caste, problem with substance abuse and homeless persons having no place to go. And everybody's like, oh, I don't want them in my backyard. So, it's it's so much easier to push these people away and not see them. So of course, when you don't see them, you don't have to think about them, right? So, imagine how horrible it must be to be indigent or homeless and mentally ill, and there's all these barriers for you to get some sort of care. And just mental health care alone or substance abuse care alone, and then general medical care, it's virtually impossible. So how do you do it? Well, you self-medicate with cheap drugs and cheap alcohol. It's the quickest way to do it, and that becomes very prevalent.
Mhm.
And then we run into, now you have a major medical illness and you have a substance abuse disorder.
Sure.
And guess what? You ran out, you don't have any money, so you're going to do whatever it takes to get some money, whether that's, and let's face it, that's got to be a crime. So whether it's, you know, whatever the crime is, it's going to be a crime. It's going to be a crime to get money. And if we look at this from a public health perspective, it's phenomenally impacting, because you have a rise in everything from, criminal activity, to suicides and homicides, to sexually transmitted diseases, to people who turn to, prostitution, sex work, to, other, now you run into, infectious disease processes and all kinds of things. So, we could have not had any of this if you just left the fucking state's hospital systems open. Not that would have cured it all, but it
You know how
really,
it's
yeah,
no different nowadays. People got too much time on their hands and too many opinions. It seems like right off the bat they had a better solution. There's never a perfect solution to any
right,
scenario, but if a burn victim needs treatment, they have treatment for the burn victims, and we set aside resources and places. The same for a
right,
cancer unit. The same for whatever it is. Now the mental health unit has some sort of stigma that someone else who's not experiencing it. We have people speaking for other groups on all sorts of topics, as we know.
right,
They got no place to speak.
right,
It's it'll drive. We could go on for hours with that stuff, but
right.
I can see it. I can see how it happened then, because I could see it happening now. It's baffling, but you know,
So,
and
but
how does that all? But how do so you get into this scenario where these problems start to snowball, because now these people don't have a place to get treatment. Now they're forced to be homeless, whether that's a short period of time, but it always turns into a larger problem, a longer
right.
period problem. I mean, how do people expect to get out of pull themselves out of this scenario, you know?
Well, and that's the problem, because particularly here in the United States, we're founded on rugged individualism, right?
Mm.
And we want to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps and carry on. Now, I 100% support that idea, but it doesn't work for everybody.
Sure.
you know and for those who it doesn't work for, they need some help pulling up their bootstraps.
Yeah.
And they may not be rugged individualists, they may have to be rugged communityists,
Yeah.
uh, and need other people to help them. So,
Yeah.
I hate to.
We've all had help from something. I mean, even the people
Right,
pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. They had maybe someone that just as simply believed in them that they could do whatever
right.
their endeavor was, which makes a difference. That it is help, and it's frustrating, because it seems like people think they got an answer for everything when it is a case by case basis.
Right.
Um, but the state had money, they had resources, they had some time to figure out these problems, and they find a way to fuck it up because of someone else's opinion. And now we have a bigger problem.
We do, and you know what? If you pay attention, with every election year, there's always a big topic, particularly everywhere. But here in Massachusetts, it's always a big topic about, where are we going to get more child and adolescent mental health beds? Where are we going to have more beds for, substance abuse programs, whether it's detox or crisis stabilization, or long-term care? What's the best way to do that? Do we force people into care? Do we not force people into care? Is it cruel and unusual? Is it against the law because they didn't get their day in court before, they got sent to Bridgewater for, involuntary substance abuse? Did they have due process? There's a lot of things to consider. And, that's a whole other, we could talk about that for years. But
how does this circle into you helping with veterans? I mean, just being a veteran yourself, and because working with homeless veterans and kind of getting them a little more educated on their feet, and just having someone to be able to assist them daily or what.
Well, yeah, it was. Now, the majority of my military career following 9/11, as an officer and as a neuropsychiatric nurse, and I worked primarily doing emergency mental health and combat and operational stress mitigation, and that takes the form of a lot of pieces, and it's a very complex system of in the military healthcare is designed with the idea that we keep the service member in the fight, particularly if we're at war. And when you're on the battlefield, there are some injuries that can keep you in the fight, and there's some injuries that take you out of the fight.
Sure.
And those are both physical and psychic. So it depends. And we don't want to take anybody out of the fight because, it may seem simple to regular people to say, just replace them with another soldier. Well, that's not very easy. And in the military, and I can speak on behalf of the Army. In the Army, Army commanders have an enormous amount of power when it comes to their own troops, and they have virtually the final say on virtually everything. And in order for that commander to replace a soldier, whether it's from a physical injury like an explosive device or a gunshot wound, or a mental health injury like a traumatic stress reaction, or a combat or operational stress reaction, or panic disorders, or the uncovering of a major medical mental illness, or what have you, a suicide attempt, a homicide attempt. Those soldiers have to come out of the fight and be wrapped up in this, again, very complex medical care system that is, again, geared at fixing the service member and getting them back in the fight. And we can't always do that. And so my job had been for years to not only function as the provider in performing these evaluations, but as the provider to help mitigate those risks individually, at the individual level, by seeing soldiers for therapy, or for larger units, whether it's a platoon or even company size or even brigade size elements, where we present to large audiences for like pre-deployment skills for resiliency and whatnot, or even post-deployment skills to try to help service members reintegrate themselves back into life. But the reality is that never truly happens.
Mm-hmm.
I can speak from the perspective as that mental health provider, as that medical provider, and as the soldier on the battlefield. So it's war is a terrible thing, and it affects people in ways that we're still learning about.
Mhm.
And it doesn't just affect one person. Like, it doesn't just affect the soldier, but it will eventually affect society, because it affects, because we expect, that's our citizen, right? So we expect them to reintegrate, and that reintegration process is very difficult. It's a reintegration, back into the military structure, or back into the family structure, or back into society.
Mhm.
um and 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 we're always trying to find new ways to get that service member to do that. And the service member has either, a severe medical problem, or they have a severe mental health problem. And we've learned a lot of things about PTSD, not just in the military, but in the civilian side as well. Because we got to, the reality is we're talking about service members with PTSD, but there's all these other people out there, right? All our first responders, and
Mhm.
people who have suffered abuse or rape or severe neglect, childhood trauma, which makes things far more complex. Somebody who survives a motor vehicle crash. I mean, these are all things that everybody responds to differently, but they leave lasting and impacting, not just maybe actual physical scars, but chemically imprinted
Yeah,
psychic scars in the brain that never go away.
sure.
They never go away. And so my career in nursing and in medicine, I've never had a very typical nursing job in my entire career. um and and I've had the opportunity to be all over the world, and to travel to a few different continents, and to treat people in on the battlefield, and in jungles, and in humanitarian rescue efforts, and all these different things, where all kinds of different areas of medicine come to play to treat one person.
Well,
And I've done it for a very, very, very long time. And when I retired, I had a lot of concerns. Like, I'm like, because I had to integrate into the regular world and deal with regular people. And I was facing the idea that, holy shit, am I going to have to work with civilians? What am I going to do? I don't know. I don't know how to speak to them. I don't know. They're not going to know how to speak to me. My culture is different than their culture. Don't forget, in the military, it's virtually 1% or less of our entire population is involved in military service. And then there's only a 1% of those persons who are at war, engaged in combat. And then you come back, and or you get discharged, or you retire, and now you're enmeshed with the other 99%.
yeah.
you know so what do you do?
It must
I
make
had
for
no
a really lonely, kind of a lonely integration back, when
well, it can. And so I didn't know what to do. um and I didn't know where to go. And so, literally, my path to working with homeless veterans um, came from a Google search. Literally, frantically. I could have even typed, "What the fuck am I supposed to do now?" Click. And here was this job that showed up, and it was part time. It was working 2 days a week. Uh, with homeless veterans. And I thought, what better way for me to give back to my own community? Not only my physical community here in Worcester County, um, but to the military community and to the veteran community, what better way? There was no better way as far as I was concerned. So I applied for that job, and frankly, I don't want to sound like a dick, but I am, I'm way over, and this was a problem really for any nursing job that I was looking at, because I'm overexperienced, I'm overqualified, I'm overeducated, yet it's really been almost 30 years since I've been integrated into a civilian hospital, and have no idea about like some of the technology that's now being used, because we didn't have the same exact technology where I was working, and thinking I'm not going to be able to work in this system. Um, to go and work at a nonprofit homeless shelter, which I'm still all of those other things, and it didn't matter. Like the money didn't matter, and I immediately took to it. And not all of the employees are veterans either. There's only a small number of employees who are veterans. Luckily, my counterpart, the full-time guy, is a veteran also. The full-time nurse. He's a Marine Corps veteran and an exercise scientist. So we get along great. Yeah. Yeah, you couldn't have asked for actually something better. And um you know which really leads me to the whole programming, because it's my partner and I, we're essentially independent providers in a system that's not made for independent providers. So really anything outside of our scope of practice, we have to refer to a physician, which we do. But we're also not a medical facility. So, our residents can't really be there if they're really sick. They can go and see a physician. We don't take physician orders, but it would be like if somebody was going home with a plan, then we can, if they have trouble making that plan, we help them. So, you know, it was tough to, like, my clinical experience was different than my partner's clinical experience. So when I came along, um, I I instituted a number of different changes that hadn't been there. Like I wanted, other equipment for things like, hemorrhage control and potential gunshot wounds. And people were asking me, they're like, well, what do you need equipment for gunshot wounds for? I'm like, because I'm really surprised nobody's come in here with a gun and shot somebody. um you know it's and they're like, well, we don't think that way. I'm like, well, I think that way. So now we have equipment, um and that's good. Like, we didn't have an active shooter plan, we didn't have like a biohazardous waste disposal plan, which really astounded me, because to me they seemed like just fucking simple run-of-the-mill everyday things
Yeah.
that you should have built into your system. And so we didn't even really have a COVID plan. Like when I started there, it was sort of in the middle of the pandemic, um, and they gave me a book, um, and of course we're never going to mention the name of the organization I work for, um, but they gave me a book and said, "Here's our COVID plan," and I read through it, and it was really just a collective bunch of pages that said COVID on it here and there, and I handed it back to them and I said, "This is ridiculous. This isn't a plan." And we came up with a plan, and the other nurse said to me, yeah, they won't, this, I wrote a plan and they didn't accept it. And I said, well, here's what we do. And I took the plan that they had, and in a meeting, I threw it in a trash barrel. And I said, okay, that plan doesn't exist anymore. Here's the new plan. And I said, I checked, and I said, and there's only 2 registered nurses that work here. So there's only 2 people qualified to come up with the information. So I, this, and they've never really had to deal with me before. So I'm like, all right, everybody in the room, put up their hand who's a registered nurse and who's qualified to make these decisions. And I'm like, okay. Well, that narrowed that down. So here's the COVID plan. So now we have a COVID plan. The same thing happened with what do we do with programming? It would seem to me to be, this, it's supposed to be a veterans transitional program for homeless veterans. Yet we were doing no, health and wellness training at all for the veterans. And this was something else that I had pointed out. And there was a person in my leadership chain who was a veteran herself, but was kind of snacky about shit and was like, well, then why don't you go down and begin a program? And I just said, okay. And that was the very first day that we started programming. And the whiteboards by Mac were invented. And I think my very first one was on MRSA. And, it's been uphill since then. So now, since that time, it's been integrated into the weekly program that the 2 days a week that I'm there, I do, 2 full programs. Currently, I'm facilitating the SAMHSA anger management program. It's altered a little bit to suit our needs, particularly. And then I have my Healthy Lifestyles for Veterans group, which is where the whiteboards come in. Gotcha. And with that, which you've seen, I cover a lot of topics. The heavy hitters that I keep in there are at minimum like quarterly suicide prevention training for the veterans, as well as different mental health, almost like seminars. Like I'll do it for like 3 or 4 or 5 weeks at a time, because it can be that complex. Right. And this isn't really to teach the veterans, the scientific information or even the biology, but this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. We can't, when we talk about coaching people or providing health education, if you don't know, like people don't know what they don't know, right? So if you don't know, say for instance, how high blood pressure works, and your doctor, we all know somebody who might be in our age category or probably older, and you say, oh, do you take blood pressure medication? Yeah, I think so. Do you know what it's called? No, I think it's the yellow pill. Well, what does it do? Lowers my blood pressure. Do you take it every day? Some days. I take it mostly when I feel like my blood pressure is high, so, there's something wrong with everything I just said. So, and this is what we hear. And of course, the people who come to my group mostly are not the younger veterans. They come and then they roll their eyes at me like every other 20 something and some early 30 somethings. And they say, well, this isn't for me. I don't need to know this. And then they leave. And it's not mandatory, so they can. But the older veterans who are in their 6th, 7th, and 8th decades, are like, oh my God, how come nobody ever told me this before? And that is with a variety of things. I got a guy who just started hepatitis C treatment because he took my hepatitis C class. And and it's not that he didn't know that he had hepatitis C, because he did, but he didn't believe the doctor that treatment with antiviral medication would cure his hepatitis C. And now he's on the treatment, and he's sick as shit because the medication's very powerful and it'll make you ill, and his case is complex, so he's on a 12-week course of treatment. But after 12 weeks, he's not really going to have hepatitis C anymore. because he sat in on actually not even an entire class, on half of a class.
Yeah.
He just happened to come in where I said, hepatitis C will kill you, and you won't even know it. And that was it. And that was it. I have a guy who's getting, Avastin injections for his diabetic retinopathy now because he didn't believe the VA ophthalmologist, even when his vision was obscured by a red haze, which was caused by, retinal hemorrhage. He didn't believe that, somebody could cure that or his diabetes had anything to do with that. And then he took one of my classes, and afterwards he's like, "Are you fucking serious? I'm gonna go blind?" I'm like, "You're gonna be Ray Charles." And I said, "And you don't know how to play the piano." And he's like, "Oh fuck." So, these things really, really happen. And this is a very small group of people that, that to me, it seems, some of these residents had been there a while, and why didn't we have a system in place to give them this information? And it's interesting because my coworker, my partner, the Marine Corps veteran who's a nurse, who tells me he tried to do some of these things and got a lot of pushback. Well, we have very different personalities, where I don't take no for an answer. And I only answer to the gods. So it's, how do you argue with a guy like that, right? I don't do well for authority, despite having a career in the military. So I tend to do what I want, and but I'm hard to argue against because I'm often not wrong, and particularly when it comes to this, I'm wrong about a whole lot of other shit, but I'm not wrong about this. Yeah, so you're either gonna stand up and actually put your money where your mouth is, and you're gonna deliver the goods, or you're not.
Right.
And if you're gonna put me out there, and my part of my job is to deliver the goods, I'm gonna deliver all the goods. You're gonna get them all.
Your whiteboard's caught my eye for that for sure. One thing that stands out is you said it's such a small group of people that get to at the moment really kind of take part in some of in these classes that you teach, and I think it's great that you put them on Instagram just so people can take a look at them. Yeah, we don't get to hear your explanation and kind of dive into it, but I'm I'm hoping eventually you and I can have a few more talks and go ahead and bring some of these whiteboards up, and just some of the fun ones, the interesting ones, go over them and try to give people, if you get another 50 people that just kind of say, "Hey, that's cool, let me listen into that,"
right,
and have an understanding. And it's some of them, you're right, they range from such different topics. Some people don't know how to recognize maybe their own suicidal thoughts, or like you have one on suicidal prevention. A lot of people, we all know what suicide is, and we all know that it's unfortunately way too common with veterans. You see a ton of them taking their own lives, but a lot of them don't know where to go from there. They go, "Oh geez, I have a thought, it's in and out my head, I'm fine now, I wasn't fine 5 minutes ago," and they don't know where to go from there. So I really think it's something that needs another minute or two for, and then there's other ones that the nerd in me, I enjoyed the one on insulin resistance,
right,
something that people don't know a lot about that really plays a huge factor into all facets of your health.
right, exactly.
People really don't understand it, unfortunately, and it would be a good one for people to get to know. But we got time for one more question, and
Okay.
one thing I was wondering about is if you could have it your way and you could just implement one thing that would make people more aware of, like you say, how to talk to veterans, how to help them when they're troubled, because it's not the same scenario as I'm having a bad day compared to where a veteran's having a bad day. They might have a different underlying reason for that.
Yeah.
Not like one's worse or one's better.
Right.
Bad day sucks for everybody that's in it.
Right.
But I have some friends that struggle with difficulties from PTSD, some of the stuff that they've been through, or traumatic things that they've been through, and it's hard to relate. I can't relate to these things. The most traumatic thing to happen to me, it's not like you're going to rank them, but it might not be as bad as what they've gone through, or it might be just so different that they're hard to correlate. So, I mean, if you could give advice to someone that hasn't been in the service and they got a friend that they can see is a little bit more quiet, that's obviously having some signs of tough times integrating back into society, or they've been back in society for 20 years and they're still not the same Mark that they once knew, what would you suggest?
I think my way of treating people who are living with mental illness, or soldiers, fellow veterans, who doesn't matter. I'm favorable of speaking to people on their level. So, I know a lot of big words, and I try not to use them. The funny part is I guess I really don't really know how to pronounce a lot of the big words, but I kind of know what they mean. But my point is to try to speak to people on their level. And so there's truly no magic, Dave. There's at its bare bones, it's how you doing? How are you? What's going on? Is there anything I can do? Do you need me to do anything? And if you thought somebody was suicidal, the very best question you could ask them is, are you suicidal? Are you having suicidal thoughts? You're not going to put that idea in their head. That's a fallacy. You're not going to make Jimmy more suicidal by asking Jimmy if he is suicidal. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And there would be no expectation of like a guy on the street to even a friend to get that friend to another place. But the best advice I would give is to not leave them alone. It's not like you're going to block them into a room or hug them to death, but don't leave them alone. Sometimes just sitting and listening and being available and just knowing that somebody is going to give them the time of day and the space to say or, do what they need to do. Because sometimes the person just might need to get something off their chest. And
I've heard people say that you feel like they're bothering someone to just go ahead and like, I don't want to bother you with my issues. And it's never the case. And it's just
that in the military culture, we're again, this goes back to the whole rugged individualism issue. We're taught to be very self-reliant, even in a group, right? Because you're really not an individual, but you're an individual. So it's kind of weird. So you're always expected to place your mission first and to drive on. And that message doesn't mix with the other message we try to give service members. We want you to be resilient and ask for help. So, that's sort of that's where craziness begins, because, you've asked the person to do two entirely different things. And I think there's such a divide right now, I think, because we've been fighting wars in Iraq and Afghanistan for over 20 years, and then now we're not. And so there's this growing number of global war on terror veterans, and it's 20 years worth of war, longest wars we've ever fought. So you have such an age range of veterans, of war veterans, from, conceivably, late teens, 19-year-olds to, 60 and maybe 70-year-olds, if they're old, old officers in particular. So how do you talk to these people? Well, it it's like talking to anybody else. You're not bothering them. I think veterans have particularly war veterans have a certain demeanor about them, and maybe more likely to do things on their own more. I think we talked about that, like in the gym. We have a number of veterans who work out at our gym, but there's usually not a group of veterans working out together. It's usually one veteran working out. And so
So I guess not being shy to just kind of pretty much put it straightforward. You want to ask, how someone,
yeah,
some seems off, everybody.
yeah, like you have, like your buddy, and like what would be the best way, like if you thought he was down or acting differently, or you had some concerns, what would be the best way to deal with that? Well, the best way to deal with that would be to just point blank ask him.
Yeah.
So I've never personally met the guy, but we've virtually met each other. And I got the suspicion that he was having a particularly shitty day, so I sent him a link. I said, "Hey, I hope I'm not interrupting your shitty day, but here's a link that you might find helpful." um and then he sent me a message that said, "Thanks, I'm going to look at this." And honestly, and that's what I do with other veterans, because even veterans I know that have done some sort of programming to help their mental health or to prevent suicide. And it's tough. It's akin to somebody who goes to treatment for substance abuse that needs detox, right? They go to detox, they get detoxed, everything's better. They go or do not go to a crisis stabilization bed, and they go back to life, and they try to pick up where they left off and carry on. And that's pissa until the next bad thing happens.
Right.
And that's the key. That's the key, Dave, is to remember, I learned two things from my mentor in graduate school, who was an old psychiatrist. His name was Dr. Nadeau, and he was a Canadian who came to the United States during World War II to join the U.S. Army, so he could be a doctor in the U.S. Army. And he looked like Sigmund Freud. And I knew him when he was much older. And he was my mentor in grad school. And he had said to me, "Here are the two things I want you to remember. Always look your patients in the eye."
Mm-hmm.
The next thing he said to me is, "Remember, we're all one bad day away from being where they are today."
Well,
so, yeah. So, you know what? And that's key. The key is to sort of like in one of my last videos that I posted about this. And it's what it's I hate to sound like a pussy, but it's like to be kind to each other. Don't be a dick. I think that's a big deal with men, because men want to be tough guys. At least some of them. I mean, I think unfortunately there's a population of men, I think, who don't want to be tough guys now, and I have an issue with that. That's a whole other separate thing. But veterans in particular, they all want to be tough guys. I remember talking to a bunch of soldiers one day, and it was a group of soldiers, and I had posted some ridiculous video for them to watch, and they all broke the ice, and they were all laughing. And I put my hand up and I said, "Who in the room grew up wanting to be a superhero. And, you know, almost the entire room raised their hand. I said, well, congratulations, because you're all superheroes and thank you for your service. And, because they wanted to, for whatever reason, people joined the military for whatever reason they had. And I think at the heart of that is to protect our freedom and our way of life and to stand up to something bigger and to give yourself to something that's bigger than you. And that's pretty huge.
Yeah.
It's pretty huge. And then when that's gone, what are you? You're nothing. You're left with, you're like everybody else, and everybody else sucks because they're just regular people, right? And that doesn't mean that service members or veterans are better than anybody else. Doesn't mean that at all. But what it means is that there's been this sense of belongingness and this sense of importance, but not self-importance, important to other people. It's a sense of purpose, a sense of drive, a sense of camaraderie, this esprit de corps. There's all these sort of motto things we could call it, and it's true. Those all exist. And then when they go away, there isn't anything there. So what do a lot of veterans do? Well, they avoid all those things because they're reminders of things, whether they were good or bad, and they don't want to deal with them. They isolate themselves because nobody else can understand them, so only they can understand themselves. So they become isolative. And and you mentioned earlier that must be rather lonely, and it's incredibly lonely. So this person becomes lonely, and then your brain plays tricks on you. It makes you believe things that aren't true, and it tells you things that aren't true, and you begin to believe it. And if you've been traumatized in any way, it makes all of those things so much more profound. And simple acts such as going to the gym or driving down a road or going to a crowded store or conflict resolution, some of these things that seem simple and ought to be are not. And I'm speaking from a professional point of view and from a personal point of view, because I'm certainly not immune to any of this, and I've had my own struggles. I've had 30 years of, I suppose, impactful traumatic events, drilled into my brain with an expectation that I'm still going to be, a good and reasonable, human being and make it through this world. And while I want that to be true, I know that it comes with a cost. And so do other veterans. They know that. So, there's a lot of dudes out there and women, and when I say dudes, that's sort of that's my gender neutral term for everybody. The dudes will, veterans are, I think we have a higher, post-service substance abuse disorder number. We have a higher degree of untreated mental illnesses. I think currently, if I read the numbers correctly, we're highest in homelessness, joblessness, divorce rates. It just goes on and on and on. And it's because the service member can't seem to get back with anybody else. And even if somebody really loves them, how long do you think they can tolerate that? whether it's a deployment cycle, and I know guys, who had, essentially back-to-back combat deployments for years. Luckily my family didn't have to have that. And, I still had a pretty high, deployment schedule, but it certainly wasn't back-to-back. And they weren't always as long as, as some other ones. So it's, imagine, you're married to somebody, or you're in a long-term relationship with somebody like that, and you expect that relationship to last. Some do. We have our family, and we have other military families that we are close with, who, every day is a struggle, to keep it together. And, without getting off your original question, I mean, I know my wife faced that. She didn't know how to talk to me. She didn't know how to talk to her own husband, and she's just learning to.
Yeah.
Like recently, for years, she would just ask me why I was angry all the time, and I was sort of left with thinking, I'm not angry. What the fuck am I angry about? Maybe I was. I don't know. I mean, it just occurred to me recently that when I thought I was acting or presenting assertively, I wasn't. I was being aggressive. I mean, me. I'm, and at our gym, I'm the biggest 5'8", 140-pound guy in the room. I'm a giant. And you know what? I believe that, because it's how I carry myself. And and I know that and I've actually had people say to me, you know what? You're right. I always thought you were a lot taller. And I had a coworker, a young guy, who walked into me and said, "Excuse me," and then said, "You were like walking into a fucking wall," because he couldn't move me, and there's nothing on me that's squishy. It's so. Here's my point: veterans we create our own barriers, and people who are in our lives don't know how to breach those barriers. And Wendy is a writer also, on top of all the things that she does. And she, for a while, was writing for an online journal called the Havoc Journal. And she's authored a number of articles there. And one of the articles, she writes about me in the articles. And in one of them, she mentioned how, my devotion to fitness and bodybuilding, even at my age, and I'm going to be 55 this year. And she wrote something to the effect of, he's dedicated to his workouts, and somehow is able to lift weights that he, shouldn't be able to lift. And he's used the gym to create a shield of armor against himself that shields him from everybody else in the world. And reading that was a little difficult, but I think it's true. So, people get into strength training and bodybuilding for all kinds of reasons. And I think that that's a big one. It's to create something that we haven't been or are not, but it's something that we want to be. And I think it's also a way to protect ourselves from other things. We have that, you always see that expression floating around, be hard to kill. Yeah, you know what? It is. It's harder to kill somebody that's stronger than you and has more muscle than you are, than you do. Certainly. It's you're a lot better off in this world for it, I think. But but it also sets you apart from other people in ways. And I think with veterans, I see them because I know other veterans in the place, and we kind of know that we're veterans, but there's very few of us that actually talk to each other.
Sure.
At all, even make eye contact,
Mm-hmm.
and I find myself doing it. I get very anxious when the club is packed,
Yeah.
and I only go one night a week, and that's Thursdays, and it's because it's after work, and
Mm-hmm.
I hate it. I hate going at that time of night. I like going to see because I get to see you and Jackie. I got to meet Pete the other night. That was awesome. And the and the kids are always nice to me. It's not like they're not. Um, but I hate going because it revs my stress level way out of control. And sometimes I find myself sort of zoning out, or I find myself holding on to a piece of equipment and I'm kind of like, why am I holding on to this? What the fuck's the matter with me? You
Yeah.
know, and sometimes my oldest daughter is there, and she has noticed it and come up to me and talk to me. And she's been my I know I said we really weren't going to talk about the kids, and I won't mention her name, but she's been very instrumental in my reintegration,
Mm-hmm.
and I couldn't have done it without her. But his the best way to deal with veterans and their mental health is to um, treat them like regular people.
Yeah.
There's no, like I said, there's no magic.
Sure.
It's, hey, how you doing? Hey, am I bothering you? That'll answer your question if you're bothering them or not. Am I bothering you? Um, More than likely, they're going to say no. They might ignore you. So what? Let them ignore you. You
Well,
know,
it's
but
because it's a
that's what it all boils down to. Um, when I do suicide prevention training for anybody, veterans or anybody else, it's always, you know, be straightforward and say the words. And once you say the words, if they say no, let it ride. Then the answer is no. You can't be responsible for everybody.
yeah.
Um, if the answer is yes, don't leave them alone.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Well, it's a
ask them.
simple approach.
Ask them. Yeah, if you can help.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
A lot of us just don't know, if we're going to, yeah, I think one good thing you said is it's not like you're going to trigger somebody, hopefully, by just being concerned and making sure how's your buddy doing. We
yeah.
referenced, it's funny you brought up a few things, and my buddy Matt, that won't mind
Mm-hmm.
me, we referenced him earlier, but a lot of those things happen to him. I mean, we went to a Patriots game, and he knows he's fine. He knows he's safe, but it's a
Mm-hmm.
clustered area. It's everybody gets bottlenecked in this section, and you really don't have the room to just have your own personal space. And but
Right.
being there and making them realize, hey, this is the real scenario. We're going to be all
Right.
right. We're all together. And the other thing that's kind of funny that you brought up. Is a lot of these times it seems like, and I do this myself, I manifest problems in my own head that aren't reality.
Yeah. Yeah.
I forget who said it, if it was Seneca or might have been a Marcus Aurelius quote, but he said something about like the problems that you make in your head are always worse than the problems that are in reality.
Mm.
What your perception of something is always going to be heightened and alarmed, just
Yeah.
like you walking into the gym in a crowded Thursday. What's the reality? It's just the crowded gym. There's just more people.
Right.
No different
Yep.
than it was with half the people. But the
Right.
problem that you make in your head, it heightens your alertness, and it makes sense. So I guess one thing that's helped me with my buddy Matt is just knowing his specific things that flag his head of making him feel, whether it's uncomfortable or a
Right.
scenario like, hey, I gotta go, or why am I so quiet? I can usually figure out, oh, I see what's going on. This is why Matt's being quiet.
Yep.
But you're right, being just a simple friend and actually
Yeah.
having the fact that he's a veteran just be secondary. He's someone
Yep.
that's a buddy of mine that I greatly care about, want to make sure I can be a good friend, just like I
Right.
would want the same in return. Kind of
Yeah.
like you and I are buddies. Just it's not like have a thing for wanting to gravitate more towards a specific kind of person, but you and I get along very well because we have a
Yep.
lot of those similar mindsets, and
Hmm.
it's good. It's something I really hope we can talk more about because I feel, it's sad. It's the same theme we've had earlier on. It seems like veterans get the shit end of the stick on a lot
Hmm.
of aspects. You get a scenario a while ago that they have a program running where there's some homeless veterans, or they need some sort of mental help, and then they strip away the funding for that. And
Right.
then, it's no different than what's happening today. They always seem to get the back seat, never really
Yeah.
get the attention they deserve. And it's not like maybe a lot of people would probably say they deserve a little extra attention than the average person because of what they've been through or what they were willing to sacrifice that others maybe didn't, step up at the time to do. Um, but nonetheless, they certainly don't deserve the worst of the worst in the bottom of the barrel. And
Right.
it kind of happens, it kind of happens, you see, I won't go off on a tangent, but you see stuff in
Mm.
like San Francisco, and it seems, or across the country, and it's like the drug addicted homeless get much more better treatment than the veteran homeless. And it's not a difference. One's not, they're both a problem that's having rock
Yeah.
bottom. This coming from a recovering alcoholic myself.
Right.
So I understand what the, substance abuse issues, are and how you could lead to being homeless that way. But it's something I'd like to shed a more light on, and I think you're a great
Mhm.
person to speak to. And you've definitely a few times made me see things differently that I didn't understand for sure. Just having just realizing that how small the education is for some veterans out there after the fact. They had to have you come up with a great idea in your head to influence a small group of people that you
Right.
can help. Why is this not
Yep.
maybe a standard thing or a standard option that everyone should have some basic general health education? As a
Right.
veteran, you've been away for X amount of time and you've been caught up with the service, and things have changed. Let's help you get reacclimated to the home that you left a
Right.
while back. And so I know that we'll be having you on more. I'm just kind of starting to pull out all my buddies and get them on here and try to get some content together where we can kind of share some of the things we've been through and help other people in the long run, and or at least get other people to, someone today's going to realize like, hey, my buddy that's a veteran, maybe I shouldn't be shy to go talk to him and be like, hey, can I be a
Right.
friend? There's something I can do for you.
Yeah.
Never would have thought it.
Right. I put on, I thank you for all that, by the way. And I appreciate, you thinking of me for this, and I'm glad that we get a chance to do this together, because I think it's really going to be, I think it's going to be awesome. And I mentioned the Veterans Crisis Line a lot. I know in a lot of my stuff, and I think and I can tell you, I have a buddy of mine who's he is a veteran, and it's funny because he doesn't like to talk about him being a veteran, because he's not a U.S. veteran. He's an Israeli veteran, and he I don't think he celebrates, Israeli Veterans Day, and certainly doesn't talk about it here in the United States. And I don't think he likes it when I bring it up. But nevertheless, he's a veteran, and um, in and he works in the Pacific Northwest and runs a regional call center for the Crisis Line network. Um, and so, and he's is a mental health provider, and supervises that whole program. And they're inundated with phone calls, every day, nonstop, 24 hours a day, every single day. And, sometimes they're veterans, sometimes they're not. We have the press one, 988 press one is the same we have the 1-800 number press one that sort of guides it specifically for veterans, in the way that the person that's on the phone is a train. They're all trained, verbal phone responders. And the goal is, of course, to help the person get through their crisis, and to guide them to, the next step, whether that next step is, all right, now we need to call 911 and we need an ambulance. That operator, that person has the ability to do that. Or, do you have a friend that can drive you to the emergency room? Can this wait till tomorrow till you talk to your therapist? Do you need to call your psychiatrist? And is there somebody on call for that psychiatrist? Because when somebody's in a crisis, they're not thinking about, B, C, D, E, and F. They're only thinking about A. And that crisis responder can help them work through those things. And in July, this past July, is when we nationally went with the 988 system. We talked about it for years, and now it's in place, and it's working in I think in all the major communities. I think in some outlying communities, I think like the enhanced 911 system, it's still got bugs. Like if you and it's different, people don't realize, I think it's different that if you call from a landline versus a cell phone. Like here in Worcester County, if you use a cell phone and say you call 911, you get enhanced 911 and it goes to a call center. And they say, where are you calling from? Well, I'm in Worcester. Okay. Then they patch you through to like Worcester EMS or Worcester Police. And so there is that system in place, and it's getting used, and it's getting used in large numbers. And that speaks volumes to what's going on currently in our country. Not just with veterans, but for the general population. And I really don't know the reasons for that. I don't know if the isolation during the pandemic had something to do with that for people, or perhaps loss of jobs, or loss of domicile, or maybe increased debt. I don't know. But there's been a huge uptake in that service being used. And I know, because I still have colleagues that work in the regular system out there, that there's no beds. There's no beds anywhere for people to go if somebody needs to be in the hospital. And the ER is the worst place to be. Even like we're lucky here in Massachusetts, particularly in Central Mass, where we have things like Community Health Link. They have an emergency services. UMass has emergency mental health. That's geared specifically for psychiatric crises. But there's no place for veterans to go in here at all. They can't go to the Worcester outpatient clinic or the Fitchburg outpatient clinic. They could, but they're just going to call 911 and send in the emergency room. And they're going to end up in Leominster emergency room. What a fucking travesty that is. That's like the worst place in the world to be. And they have a mental health area in their ER, which is, again, a travesty. But we have the vet center in Worcester, but that's only like regular business hours. There's nowhere, the emergency rooms are in Boston. I'm going to go to Jamaica Plain or to West Roxbury.
But all in all, if the veteran has an issue, they can still use, so that it's called 988. And then press 1 for veteran.
Yep.
Issues.
Gotcha. Yep.
We'll make sure we get that up top or below in the description.
Awesome.
Well, but that's well, man, I appreciate it, Mark. You
that was great.
And a chance to talk. I've been wanting to. We never get to stop and have just a 2-minute convo at the gym. It turns out 2 minutes, and then it goes. I could talk to you all day, so we got our chance to talk, and we'll do this more often. Well, there's some stuff I want to go over with you there, and just continue to try to educate some people, see if we can help some people just have some resources at their tips, or just think differently, and let some of these veterans realize that their problems aren't going unforgotten. Some of us, damn, we want to see if we can help or do something about it, or at least just tell others to be more aware. But
awesome.
All right, man. Well, we'll catch up soon, and
Absolutely.
see you next Thursday at the gym for sure.
Yeah, yes, you will. All right. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. Thanks, Dave. I appreciate the opportunity.
You too. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. We appreciate your support. Let us know what you guys think in the comments below. All right. Have a good one.